I really wanted this leaf to fit in the frame, but my idea was like to put it here. It's not happening, but I would love it to be somewhere here. See, I feel like I always need people in the back just holding my plants or something, because clearly they do not fit on my table, and this is tipping over very quickly. Lovely. I would ask you to consider your behavior and just re-evaluate where you are at in life. If you clicked on this video because you expected growing tips from Anthurium Pro, you might want to reconsider that. What I wanted to talk about today is how I started to collect and grow Anthuriums, and it's been about 6 months. For some of the species it's been a lot longer, and we will address that, but I have noticed just by looking at my plant shelves that my Anthurium collection is increasing and increasing, and I have also noticed that I'm doing a lot of window shopping on the internet. I am creating a list of all the Anthuriums that I would like to get, and I fear that we will just need to build a greenhouse or something because the space. For the rest of you that come here only for hoyas, well, I think we can allow for some democracy here. You know, Anthuriums can be a faction of our Hoya cult. We will allow it, I think. Obviously, Hoyas will have to rule all. That is pretty clear, and there's no doubts about that. But, you know, we will allow for some democracy. I do stress some. We will not have any of the Calatheas or Peperomias. Absolutely not. Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about Anthuriums and how I started to grow my Anthurium collection. Before we continue, I do have to say that 60% of you watching these videos are absolute angels and you deserve every possible Hoya on the planet. And you know, the rest, 40% of you, I guess you will just have to grow Peperomias. Or if you subscribe, you can become a part of the Hoya heaven, and clearly now we have Anthuriums too. Was that really a good way to get people to subscribe? See, I'm always torn. Anyways, let's continue. I wanted to talk how I grow my Anthuriums. I'm going to show you, I think, all of my plants. Some are small, some are slightly bigger. Most of them have grown since I got them, and I'm definitely not sharing this as, you know, how to grow Anthuriums. It's nothing like that. I just wanted to share a part of my journey with Anthuriums, and I think we can be on this journey together. So if you're considering whether or not to get Anthuriums, maybe this video will help you, and you know, we can just start to grow them together from now until until we have filled out our homes. I'm going to share with you what potting mix I use, how I water them, what light do I use, or what light I give to my plants, and what light I think will do well for these plants, what fertilizer I use, and some of the issues that I have noticed on the plants that I have. And this is the plant that I talked about. This is unidentified hybrid. Now, this plant just put out this wonderful new leaf that you can see here. It is looking very, very beautiful. This leaf, when it was coming out, was absolutely spectacular. It was sort of a bronze color. I'm really in love in Anthuriums and the way when they push out new leaves, I think it looks spectacular on most of them. We did have some issue with this Anthurium. I originally got this for my friend, but she did not really have a good experience growing this plant. And I'm not really sure whether it's the humidity or what. It seems to be doing well now, but it did look very unhappy. It looked okay when I took it from my friend, but I think because there was this transition from her conditions to my conditions, and it was a bit chilly also outside when I brought it in, we did lose 2 leaves, and this is one of the original leaves that is left. You can see he is looking yellow. I did notice also when I got it that it did not have as many roots, but again, as you can see here, there are new roots growing. They are kind of red, the new ones that are growing. It's getting into my Hoya that is hanging on the ceiling. We do have more roots here, and then I would love to show you roots on the bottom, but I think that's a really bad idea. And I think I'm right. And I have no idea if my camera can even pick that up, but there are some roots there on the bottom. So this plant, I do believe, is on its way to become stable in a way. Not stable in the Clearly not in the physical way or whatever this is. It's very top heavy plant, and I do think I need to do something when it comes to propping it up. This bamboo stick is not doing much for it. One thing about Anthuriums that I noticed is that when you get them, it is very easy for them to tank. Don't be alarmed. A lot of them that I got arrived well, and some of them have been in transit for over a week. Typically, you would want them to arrive quite fast to you, but some of them that I bought have been in transit for over a week, and it's not their most favorite experience. They will start to yellow and lose the leaves. I had some that lost roots completely. I did show this plant in one of my previous videos when I talked about buying plants and the responsibility of the buyer versus the responsibility of the seller. This plant arrived with absolutely no roots. The leaves were paper thin. It looked awful, truly awful, and I honestly did not think I could recover it, especially because that was towards the beginning of my journey with Anthuriums. A good thing about Anthuriums is that as long as you can preserve the stump, you are very, very likely to get new growth. That's a wonderful thing about them. If you preserve the stump, even if the roots are rotten, it seems to me that they push out new roots very easily if you get the conditions of the potting mix right and the conditions of the environment. And I'm very happy to report that this plant, which is Anthurium waterburyanum, is looking better and better each day. This is the plant today. It just pushed out this new leaf. It is a bit smaller, but I do think that's because it was in my cabinet in the back. I did discuss it in my previous video and why I don't really adore it, at least not for Anthuriums, and it just did not get as much light, I think, and I think this might be the result. This leaf is a new leaf, and this is also a new leaf. We have gotten rid of all the old leaves. They were yellow, they were very, very damaged. I will try to find and insert some photos. But good thing, this plant, even though it had completely rotten roots, you can see now has a full pot of roots that are looking very nice, very healthy, and it is growing actively. It did take some time. This plant was imported, I would say, maybe August. I'm not quite sure on the timing. If I do get that wrong, I will put the time down below when I got it, but it did recover. It made a really wonderful recovery. And I'm very happy with this plant. I really wanted to have it. I absolutely love Anthuriums that have these longer leaves. This is a very juvenile leaf, but as it gets older, it will also become longer. And I absolutely love the texture of the leaf. It is one of the most wonderful things about Anthuriums, and I think not even philodendrons come close to them. Now, as you can see, this potting mix here is mostly bark and moss. And this is the mix that I will use for the majority of my Anthuriums if they are epiphytic Anthuriums. We will get to those that are terrestrial a bit later, but this is a mix that works really well for them. What I noticed when it comes to Anthuriums is that they do like quite a lot of water. That doesn't mean that they want to sit in water, but it seems to me they're very similar in that aspect, like some of the orchids, like Phalaenopsis, or even some of the hoyas. They would like to get a lot of water, but they would like their potting mix to be very airy and to freely drain. And I think this mix with bark and moss achieves that really well. It's, the proof is in the roots. It's not in the pudding. I don't think that would look good putting in a pot, but anyways, you can see that this mix clearly works really well. And this is not the only example. I will show you more examples, but I wanted to bring out this plant just to tell you that if you do get an Anthurium and it's not looking the best, it is very likely that it will recover as long as the stump is preserved. The second rescue Anthurium is something that I got in 2020, and it is this Anthurium vittarifolium. This plant doesn't look like much, and when I got it, it was a much larger plant. Unfortunately, at the time when I got it, I was a bit intimidated by Anthuriums. I didn't really know what I was doing. And, you know, I think it's when you start off with a new plant species, you tend to be more afraid, or at least me. I tend to experiment a bit less. Still, I do. But, you know, I just didn't really touch it. I left it as it was in the pot. And this plant arrived in a 20 centimeter pot. For those who are in inches, it's a huge ass pot, and it was filled with cocoa peat and damp. It was heavy. It had 3 plants in it, and I think the smallest one was about this size. This is actually one of the largest ones in the pot, but obviously we downsized, not on purpose. I left that plant as it was. It had beautiful, gorgeous long leaves, and I thought, you know, it's fine. After about 2 weeks, I did decide to repot the plant, and I noticed that all of the roots are gone, but even worse, all of the stem was gone. Out of 3 plants in the pot, 2 were already just dead completely, and only 1 was left, and it is this one. We do not have any more of the original leaves, but I was able to save a piece of the leaf, and I was able to save a bit of the chunk of the stem. And it took a long time, but we are here. This plant recovered. It did have several ups and downs, I'm not gonna lie, and one of those was thrips. It did have thrips, and unfortunately when it rooted and it started to grow, for whatever reason, you know, the thrips attacked this part of the stem here that touches the soil, and it started to rot there. I do assume it was thrips because the roots were not rotten, and there were thrips on the leaves, and then this part here started to rot. But anyways, as you can see, I also have this plant in the mix of moss and bark. This one has less roots, maybe less impressive than the previous one, but it does make thicker roots. They do remind me very much of orchid roots, and I'm actually not surprised, you know, when we take a look at the roots, I'm not surprised that these Anthuriums do so well in a mix that is very similar to an orchid mix, bark and moss. It was temporarily in semi-hydro, and I do have, or I had several Anthuriums that I tried to grow in semi-hydro, but unfortunately it is something that did not work for me. I did try, they did well for, you know, several months, and then after some time they stopped doing well. So I stopped growing them in semi-hydro, and some of them are still getting used to the transition, but what I have found to be the easiest way to grow them and most efficient for me is to use organic mix. That is not to say that there aren't Anthuriums that will do well in a different mix. Here I have a part of my Anthurium queremalense, and this is a leaf that grew in my care. This plant had about 4 or 5 leaves, I'm not quite sure now, and because Anthurium queremalense is sort of a climber, it has a similar growth structure to philodendrons. I was able to propagate this plant and to share it with my friend. In fact, most of the Anthuriums that I have, I do share with my friend. I do gatekeep them, I will admit to that, but you know, my friend doesn't really have that much space, and when she does, she will get propagations. Currently, I'm in the business of gatekeeping them. Now, this mix is bark, cocoa peat, perlite, and there is a top layer of moss. So there isn't actually moss in the mix, it's mostly bark, perlite, and cocoa peat. And that's because I think this Anthurium is more of a terrestrial Anthurium, at least when it is starting out. Now, it is very easy to propagate something like this, something like Anthurium queremalense. What you will need is just a bit of the stem and, you know, to wrap it with some moss, and after a couple of weeks it will develop some roots. When I potted this plant, it did not have many roots, but as you can see, they did develop quite well, and they're growing really well. I did damage, unfortunately, this root. I broke the root, so obviously now the tip looks rotten, but what had happened is I broke it because it was just stuck in the pot. I used to have a double bottom which sounds weird. Some of these pots have the shelves that go inside. I'm not sure if I can find a good example. I had to take another one to show you. So I wanted to show you how these pots look like. So they have this false bottom here, and that is how the pot looked like with Anthurium queremalense. Unfortunately, what had happened is the roots started to grow into this plastic at the bottom, and I didn't notice. And I was just taking it out, and I pulled a bit stronger, and a part of the root was left behind. Not in a good way. We will get to this other plant a bit later. I just need to find a place for it. I wanted to talk about these Anthuriums that are more of a terrestrial kind. They do really well in this mix, and they will typically need, in my experience, less watering. I will still use a top layer of moss because it helps me to know when this top layer dries out. It's usually time to water. But another benefit of this top layer of moss is that they will push out roots. If there is stem there, and there always should be, it will push out roots that will go into the potting mix. So it helps with the production of the roots. I would say that I do water something like Anthurium and queremalense a bit less. I haven't gone through summer with this plant, but typically what I noticed is about 10 days or even more. With my Anthuriums that are in bark moss, I will need to water them every week. This can go a bit longer. I do have another one that is quite big, and this is the one that I'm not sure what it is. It is a hybrid, and it is sold as Anthurium variegata. I do believe it's also one of the terrestrial Anthuriums, and this is in a similar mix to the previous one. The top layer of the moss is dry, but I haven't watered it yet, but you can see how it does help with creating new roots on this plant, particularly because it is potted a bit higher than the other one, but it does help with the root production. I do feel that this top layer is probably now filled with roots, but obviously it's something that works. I will show you the plant, but I do have to go a bit back because he's a very significant presence in the space. This is the plant, and you can see he is quite big. It is potentially, surely time to repot him. I do think I will wait a bit more. He has been in the same pot for a couple of years. It's very light now, so it's definitely time to water, but you can just see how magnificently large this plant gets and how I have no idea where this plant will go. It is variegated, some leaves more than the others. I will try to show you on the camera. I'm not sure if that shows. It's not a spectacular variegation in my opinion, but it is enough to make it something that is definitely worth keeping, especially when the new leaves are coming in. They are this bronze, pink, golden color. It's very difficult to explain, but it is really a wonderful plant. This plant, when I got it, I didn't really want to get it. It was a plant that I bought to test the shipping, to test how long it will take for plant to arrive to me, and boy, I'm glad that I did. It arrived in absolute horrible condition because they put it in a box that was too small for it and the leaves broke, but I'm very happy that, that's 2 years behind us and it's grown. All of these leaves, I do believe, are new. It only had a couple of leaves that were damaged, and we did have thrips infestation, which was not the most pleasurable experience, but now I think it's doing really, really well. And yeah, you can just see how beautifully large this plant is and how I have no absolute clue where it will live in the future. Back of the leaf is also quite lovely. It has, I'm not sure if you can see, it has this very red petiole that extends here, and it makes for this lovely reddish central vein. It does fade to green over time. This is the newest leaf, so it's still a bit pinkish, but it will fade over time. But that's okay, it's still a lovely plant. This is the first time this one is blooming. The blooms are nothing to write home about, and I do think this hybrid is unfortunately sterile, so I don't think I can do anything with the flower, but nevertheless, it's a good sign. And yeah, it will just have to go somewhere that's not in the frame. I want to talk about this plant here and a bit more on the epiphytic mix, and I think this is probably one of my best examples. This plant I got with my friend, and it's not the entire plant, it's the top cutting. She got the base, and I do have to say that the base that she got is growing much better because it already had an established root system. But this plant arrived in great condition. It is a hybrid of Anthurium magnificum. Supposedly, it does not look anything like magnificum, but it does look like a very sexy Anthurium, is all I can say. It does have this wonderful leaf shape, and it also has identity crisis. This one, you can see that it is joined here. I have no idea why, but here you can see we do have two lobes on the top. They are separated, and this leaf is much darker. The veins also look a bit different, and it has a red petiole. But it was bought as Anthurium magnificum hybrid, and to my knowledge, magnificum is supposed to have a square petiole. This one doesn't. There is a new leaf on the way, and this is why I absolutely love Anthuriums. If my camera would focus, the leaves, new leaves are absolutely gorgeous. They're so cute. They always come in this very dark color. And what is so fascinating to me, unlike, other aroids like philodendrons, that, when they start to push out new leaves, you can kind of guess what will be the size of that leaf. With Anthuriums, you absolutely have no idea until they fully harden off. They start out, small, or this was, this has been out for a couple of days, so this is bigger. It was actually smaller. But then they grow into something like this, or even larger. The reason why I wanted to show you this plant is because of the fantastic root system that it grew. Remember, this was only a top cutting, and I didn't do much to it. It only had a couple of aerial roots, and I put it in a mix of bark and moss. I made sure that it's watered well, and we have made quite a few roots. And on the other side as well, you can see that the potting mix is just filled with roots. It's really a mix that works well, especially if you're starting with Anthuriums. I don't think it's very easy to overwater them in this mix. It's very easy to underwater them, which has happened to me several times. But a good indicator of when to water is you can just touch this top of the mix. These plants I water once a week. All of my Anthuriums, except of the ones that are kind of more terrestrial, I will water once a week. And the way I do it, I take all of them to my shower. I make sure that they get a good watering of that tap water. I know I'm a monster, how dare I? And then I will use rainwater, in which I will have mixed orchid fertilizer, and I will give them one more watering with that. That's the way that I do it. I let them drain, put them back in the pot, back in the spot, on the shelf, and that's all the care that they get. The humidity in the room is about 60, 70, it really depends. And so far they don't mind it. They don't have dry edges. Some of them will have yellow edge, but I do think that is more of a light issue or a watering issue than a humidity issue. It seems to me that a lot of these can be grown in lower humidity well. I also have my dehumidifier very close to that Anthurium shelf, and they are not particularly bothered. The only time that I see a decline in my Anthuriums is when I get very busy with whatever, and I don't get to water them on time, and it's then when they will start to lose some of the bottom leaves. The plant will start to take energy from the lower leaves and to kind of get rid of those. Some of the Anthuriums that I have are tougher when it comes to under watering, and some are not. A plant that I have that really does not stand under watering is my Queen Anthurium. It will take me a moment. It will take me a moment to get it out. So this is my Queen Anthurium that is quite large. This was the one that spent more than a week in shipping, and the package got lost, and so did my mind. I was very worried because when I ordered the plant, it wasn't cold, but the temperatures dropped very quickly. I think it was September or the end of September when I ordered this plant. It just pushed out the first new leaf here, and it's this one. It did take quite a long time, I think, for it to fully develop, but it started as a teeny tiny leaf, and now it's over 70 centimeters long. This plant, when it gets underwatered, which again, easy to do, will just not stand it. It will lose leaves readily, and I do think part of the reason why some of these older leaves are so yellow is because I did have 3 or 4 episodes where I underwatered it. It's sometimes difficult for me to notice that they are dry because this one will require water in my home more than once a week. It does have some large pumice inside, bark and moss. The only reason why I put pumice is because it arrived with the plant and I thought pumice was kind of cool. It was my first experience with pumice, and I mean, I'm not wrong, pumice is kind of cool. The unfortunate thing is that I did plant it kind of in a crooked fashion because it arrived like that. I do think it would be ideal to have planted it this way. I did notice that these aerial roots in Anthurium warocqueanum do not love my home that much. They do need more moisture. A lot of the aerial roots started to grow and then they have stopped. I did put more moss on the top, but I don't think it did that much, unfortunately. But it is time, for example, now it is time to water this plant. There is no condensation on the side of the pot. The moss is dry. I suspect if I let this plant go any longer, if I let it go for a day or two, the leaves will just drop and it will look very scary. It is terrifying when you see your big Anthurium warocqueanum just drooping. It does recover, but I do think that some of these issues that I've been having with leaves not really unfurling properly is due to watering. It is about to flower, or it is actually flowering. Obviously the flowers of Anthuriums are nothing to write home about, but that's okay. That's why we have hoyas. It's important to have both of these. You have hoyas for flowers and foliage, Anthuriums for magnificent, huge foliage. And that's all you need in life and nothing else, believe me. I do hear that this plant absolutely hates the summer because it likes to be a bit cooler, which is around 20 degrees of Celsius. I think that's around 68 maybe of Fahrenheit. I don't know why, I'm just imagining that is the 20 or equivalent to 20. So we will see how it does in the summer because it does get quite hot around 90, 95 of Fahrenheit or 35, 6 of Celsius. I'm really just making up now these conversions from Celsius to Fahrenheit. I don't know based on what. We will see how it gets through the summer. That will be an interesting and hopefully a positive update that we survived the summer. This one is one that is not so happy. This is Anthurium regale, and I do have some healthy roots here. As you can see, these red ones are looking good. I do suspect some of them are a bit rotten, and it did arrive with some rot. This plant was in pure cocoa peat, and I don't think that's the best mix for this plant. Now I do have some moss and bark and pumice, but I do think that something like cocoa peat, perlite, and bark would work better maybe for this plant. It is attempting to push out a new growth, you can see here, but the old leaves, like this one, you can see how chlorotic that is. That's not the look of happiness. And this one, as you can see, it's a very nice big leaf, but again, it has these yellowish spots and it's just not doing the best. So I do expect both of these leaves to go, and this is one of the examples that is perhaps not the best, but nevertheless I wanted to show it because I'm showing all of them in my experience with them. So from what I can tell, is that the Anthurium regale is perhaps not the easiest one, or it can be maybe a bit tricky. I do think when it gets used to everything here and when we see that first leaf, I think it's going to be stable, but yeah, these old leaves are just not a big fan of me, and that's fine. Sometimes you have love that's unrequited. Another epiphytic Anthurium is this Anthurium veitchii, and again, Flappy. I don't know what happened there. That's the first and only leaf this plant put out. And this is also one of the slower ones. Out of all the Anthuriums, to me, it seems my magnificum hybrid seems to be the fastest one, and forgetii. I did hear that this particular one can go a bit drier than the rest of them, and I never noticed that this plant would start to droop leaves. They didn't even go yellow when I underwater it, so I do tend to believe that it is true that Anthurium veitchii can in fact withstand more of that dryness in the mix. It also seems that it can withstand more of the dryness in the air. It seems that this one is not very demanding. It can take higher light too. It's one of the Anthuriums that when it is under bright light, it doesn't become bleached for me. So that's a good one. I think this is a good one. It does have nice roots, and I think it's loving the moss and bark. It doesn't make roots as fast as some of the others, but it's a decent grower. Definitely faster than my Anthurium regale. When it comes to light, I do think Anthuriums are not as needy as philodendrons, and definitely not as hoyas. Hoyas do require high amounts of light, philodendrons somewhat less. Anthuriums I would put in very indirect light. Most of them currently live on that shelf in the back, and that shelf is lit with single grow light. It's an actual grow light, 150 watts, that is dimmed to about half, so about 75, a bit less than a half, and the light is quite far away from the plants. If I were to guess, it's about 1 meter away from the plants, so you know that they're not getting nearly as much light. I think if you are working with natural light, they will do really well in east-facing window. I always feel about iffy about northwest facing windows. I do have northwest facing windows, but I absolutely do not rely on that light. That's why I have grow lights. If you have an eastern facing window, I would believe you can put it directly in the window, but if you have western or southern window, feel free to pull them back, or at least that's what I would do. So not tremendous amounts of light are needed, and they still grow quite well. One note about the potting mixes, I did have some of them in semi-hydro, and it did not work for me at all, at least not in my conditions. That isn't to say that semi-hydro cannot work for Anthuriums, but I think if you're starting out, and especially if you're starting out with both Anthuriums and semi-hydro, perhaps you are not doing the best thing. I would just reconsider that. Maybe it will work for you, but it really didn't. For me, I would get leaves that didn't look very good. And I can show you a couple of examples that I have left that actually I recently transferred. One Anthurium that I had in semi-hydro, or one of the 2 or 3, is my Anthurium crystallinum, and you can see that it's not looking the best. It was recently repotted, but I think we're still adjusting. We're still not quite there yet. It can be sometimes challenging when you transfer the plants from, semi-hydro to an organic mix. There can be some issues, so I think we're still having that problem with the transition. I do hear that with Anthurium crystallinum, these yellow edges are quite a common thing, so I hope we can figure that out. But this was a tiny plant when I got it, and it did grow, but all the leaves would have some sort of an issue. So I wasn't very happy with semi-hydro, and this is not the only example. I do have one more that is a hybrid. Yeah, so maybe we don't really fit in the frame. I got this Anthurium in May of 2021, I think. I was thinking about getting it for such a long time. It was a decently big plant. I'm not sure if we have any of the original leaves, but it had 2 leaves that were like this. And it was already in a big pot with a lot of roots. I actually did cut it back because it had a very big stump in the pot. And I used that to propagate, and my friend has some propagations. I think I got 3 or 4. This is a hybrid, and it was sold to me as Anthurium radicans and Dressleri hybrid, but I don't think that's true. I asked an Anthurium group, and I got a response that it was a hybrid of Anthurium radicans crossed with something they call Anthurium garuda. It's supposedly an Indonesian hybrid, so I'm not really sure how to call it. I think maybe it's just best to say Anthurium radicans hybrid or something like that. I have no idea. If you are more knowledgeable on the naming of the Anthuriums, do let me know. But the reason why I got this plant is, first of all, it has these wonderful leaves that do remind me a bit of Anthurium luxurians. It's like a poor man's version of Anthurium luxurians, which is a plant on the wish list, but I think they look lovely. They are especially wonderful when they come in new. Now, the semi-hydro issue, you can see on this leaf, it was just not coming out properly. I did cut a couple of leaves like that because this plant produced a lot of them. It really grew magnificently well, but you can see that this leaf is just not behaving properly. It's not what you should hope for from this Anthurium, and I'm leaving it on for a bit longer, but eventually it's gonna go. But when I repotted it, I did get a much better looking leaf, this one, as you can see, and a much larger, which I'm not sure if I'm happy about, to be honest. And I think this one did receive a bit more light. It seems to me that it's very tricky to get the light right with this one. When it arrived, it also had some of the yellowish leaves, but yeah, it seems to be quite tricky. The back of the leaf is absolutely fantastic. It's absolutely massive too. I'm not sure if my camera can pick that up. Okay, I think if we stand like this, you can see the back of the leaf, and if I zoom in, you can see how interesting the veining is. It's even more prominent when you are looking at it in real life, but it's just a gorgeous plant. It is making me want both radicans and dressleri, which is a very unrealistic wish, but I think Anthurium luxurians can also be unrealistic wish, but maybe more realistic than the other ones. I'm not sure. If that doesn't count like a workout, I do not know what does. That plant, it did okay-ish in semi-hydro, but it didn't absolutely thrive. If you don't really know what you're doing, I would just recommend to stick to the more traditional methods, to more traditional mixes, and that is to say, if you don't know what you're doing with semi-hydro and Anthuriums. I did have experience with semi-hydro and hoyas, but to me it seems hoyas are much easier to get accustomed to semi-hydro, especially if you root them straight in semi-hydro, as well as philodendrons, but Anthuriums are like, not there yet. I promise this is the last thing I will talk about today, and that is, well, actually two things, but I will talk about propagations, and I will show you the last two Anthuriums that I have. So I have my Anthurium clarinervium, which I got last year, I believe. And this is not the entire plant. It was a much bigger plant with 7 or 8 leaves. I did propagate it. I kept this propagation with 2 leaves for myself because I thought they looked so adorable. It was in semi-hydro and it also didn't like it. The roots grew really well, but the leaves would die back quite frequently. And I just decided to instead, propagate it. This is one of the 3 propagations. My friend has one, the base. There is one more stem propagation. It's just a small piece of stem that had no leaves and it's starting just to grow. But the reason why I wanted to talk about propagations is I wanted to talk how easy it is to propagate them. Now this is my Anthurium forgetii, which also has one very weird sus leaf. I don't know why it's so weird, but it is what it is. It's actually supposed to be darker like this. These 2 ones are slightly fading. They got too much light and too little water. I'm gonna be honest, I just watered this plant. And still, it has a great root system. This is a top cutting of this Anthurium, and it's pushing out a new leaf, so you really shouldn't underwater water it. I do have a couple of more propagations from this one. So this was a plant with, I would say, 3 or 4 more leaves, and they didn't really make it when I was propagating it, which is okay. They have given me 2 new plants, which you can see here. One of them is the base, and one of them is the middle stem propagation. Propagating Anthuriums, to me, it's slightly nerve-wracking because sometimes there is very little space for you to cut, and sometimes you might need to sacrifice a leaf if you're not very careful with propagating. I'm trying to find some Anthuriums, but I think I put it back. You can see on this one, even though this plant has 6 leaves, it would be a bit difficult to propagate it. You could possibly get 2 cuttings from it. I would go for 2. I don't think I would go for 3. And you could cut it here. So the base would have this leaf and this leaf. And then you would have a top cutting. But you can see how space is narrow. So there are, more leaves and more nodes and more potential growing points. But it's really not easy to get in between these leaves. It's very tightly packed. So that's the main issue. They're tightly packed. So when you're taking cuttings, you might damage a leaf. And it seems to me, especially if you're taking a cutting and it doesn't have a lot of roots, the leaves again die back readily, but it does push out new growth. It's not that difficult. And these do have good roots. I did lose a couple of leaves when propagating, but I did get 3 plants in the end. So these are my babies now. I promise I'm not going to gatekeep them all because I do share them with my friend, so she will get the propagations. But I kind of want to keep all 3 of them also. I do hope to make an Anthurium propagation video in the future to show you how you can cut them. This one is actually pushing out another new growth here. The camera will not pick that up, but there is another growth on this side. Oh, it actually will pick it up. So it has 2 growing points, and that's actually what happens often when you cut these Anthuriums, especially when you have the base. It will push out new growth in several spots. So they are actually quite good to propagate, but it takes time. That's the issue. And I do think that's why they're a bit more expensive. It takes time to grow them out, to be able to propagate them, and then once you do, it's a bit nerve-wracking, but it's not impossible. Another way of doing propagation is to make your own crosses. All of these flower for me very easily. I think all of them have flowered except for the regale. That one didn't do much, but all of them flowered at least once. I did collect pollen only twice because I have no idea. I just forget that they're flowering, and I will try to cross them. But that is it about the Anthuriums, what I have to say. Only other thing that I would mention is that I use orchid fertilizer. The same one that I use for my hoyas. It is the MSU orchid fertilizer. And it seems to me that they do want to be fertilized regularly. I fertilize them each time I water. And I have read tips from other growers that you do want to fertilize them. Some of them will put slow release fertilizer in the potting mix, and then they will give them less fertilizer with watering, but they will still fertilize them when they water. So I would not be that stingy with fertilizing. I think it's important to choose a good quality fertilizer and to make sure that you are getting something that's not gonna increase the ppm so much, but it still has a lot of nutrients. Some fertilizers increase the ppm. There are just a lot of dissolved solids in water, but I don't really know what those are, because if you take a look at the label, it shouldn't be that strong, but for whatever reason, there's a lot of dissolved solids once you add them. So I just prefer to use a bit of a higher quality fertilizer, and it's not that expensive. It lasts a very long time. Again, not sponsored, but it's really a fertilizer that I believe in, and I will continue to mention it. Obviously, there are other fertilizers that work well, but make sure to get something that, or I would make sure to get something that is good quality. After all, if you're investing the money in all of these plants, if you spend, $10 on your fertilizer instead of $2, I think it's worth it. One thing I'm interested to see is the temperatures. I did have my Anthurium clarinervium for over a year, and it did well in summer. This is just one propagation, but it did well in summer. And the giant Anthurium hybrid, that is Anthurium variegata, that one I also had for over a year. The rest of them are recent additions, so we will see who will do well in summer and who will not. The one that I'm most worried about is the Anthurium warocqueanum, because I did hear that it does not stand high temperatures, so we'll see how that will go. That is all for today. I do hope that you enjoyed seeing my Anthuriums, and I hope that things that I have learned thus far is useful to you. We will talk more about Anthuriums, or I do hope that we can talk more about Anthuriums. Mostly it will be hoyas, do not worry. You know, it's kind of like having a second child. My first child are hoyas, and the first child, for whatever reason, is always the special one. I know, my sister. Anthuriums are gonna be my second child, and then hopefully there will not be a third one, because then the middle child is neglected, and I don't want to neglect my Anthuriums. Why am I talking about children? I guess if you didn't subscribe at the beginning of the video, maybe this talk will make you. It will probably make you run away from the channel, but please stay, it will be fun. Those are the Anthuriums. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up, it means a lot. Leave a comment down below what Anthuriums you have, which one is your favorite. Would you like to have more of them? I do have several of them on my wish list, and I hope that I can get more this year. I have no idea how to finish this video, so I guess I will just say goodbye. See you soon. I hope you have a wonderful day, and don't forget to tell me which Anthuriums you like. Why was there a wink at the end? Editing Miro, take care of that. Delete the eyes. Goodbye! I would like to take some time to thank my patrons. A massive shout out to my $5 patrons. 1 anonymous patron, Betsy Begonia, Bonnie Harris, Carrie, Cynthia Taylor, Danube Daniels, Estelle, Farah, Houseplant, Heather, Hoyas and Whatnots, Kelso, Kristen Sherwood, Mars B, Martina, Alif Perday, Melissa Walker, Nicole Ferrante, Nicole and Caleb of Schleif Tropicals, PJ, Plans by Misha, Rachel Colette Conroy, Robin L. Jennings, Stephanie H2O, Spinach Geek, Tanya, TJWO, Vicky Dingler, Vojta Takac, Wendy Foreman, and Zloko Niponi. Also, a big thank you to my $3 patrons: Angelina Farnan, April Arroyo, Brianna Phillips, Catherine G, Claudia L, Jerry's Garden, Lisa Helling, Lori Murphy, Morgan Kennedy, Nerdy Kathy, Nikki, Ringlov, and Ruby. And a thank you to my $1 patrons: Caroline, Lauren Monreal, Marissa Summerfield, Ryan Lambert, and Tang Watanas Riakul. Thank you all so much for your incredible support. I hope that you enjoyed the Anthurium video, and I do apologize if I get you hooked on Anthuriums as well. It is completely not my fault. Stay well and see you soon. Bye!